Hello, and welcome to this Introduction to Stammering webinar. My name is Sophie Card. I'm one of the speech and language therapists based here at the Michael Palin Centre. I do therapy and assessments with children and young people and also deliver some of the training courses that we have here. A little bit more information about MPC. So here's a picture of our building there on the left of the screen. We're based in London, in the centre of London, and we come under Whittington Health NHS Trust. And we also receive charitable funding through Whittington Health Charity as well. We provide specialist assessment and therapy of children and young people who stammer, as well as having a helpline which is open to other therapists, parents, carers, other health professionals as well. I'll come to talk a bit about the helpline later on in this webinar. We also run training programs for other therapists and professionals as well, where we reach therapists lots in the UK, but also overseas as well, who come and have training with us, either face-to-face training or online. And we also do lots of research here, looking into the nature of stammering to understand it more, and also to know and understand about the effectiveness of the therapy options that we have. So here is a screenshot of our website that you can find at that link at the top of the screen there. It has lots of information about training courses we offer, as well as resources for parents, teachers, and other professionals. So, MPC values, what matters to us? So this is really key to start with this, and you'll see that lots of key points here that I will mention will come up throughout this webinar. So we have a real focus here on looking at confident communication and participation with or without stammering. We want to understand stammering holistically, so understanding all of the different aspects of stammering. So not just one area, there's lots of different things at play, which we'll discuss throughout this webinar. We always involve the family and the wider system, including teachers and other professionals that might be involved. And we really focus on the positives and the strengths, because we know that families and young people already come with lots of strengths and lots of resources, and it's just about building on that. And we also want to be evidence-based, of course, so that we can be influenced by other people's research, and also that we can influence the evidence base as well based on research that we do here. So just right at the start of this webinar, I just want you to have a bit of a think yourself, whether you're a parent, a teacher, another professional, or someone else. What are you hoping for from this session? So take a moment to think about it, maybe pause this video as you go and jot down some ideas about what you're hoping to get from this webinar today. So what are we going to cover? So this is the programme. So we're going to start by looking at what stammering is and what stammering isn't. We'll think through why people stammer, so why people start to stammer, and then what can influence it once it's started to happen. When a young child starts to stammer, how can we know if it's likely to continue? How can people help? So how can people generally in public help, but also specifically for parents, for teachers and other healthcare professionals, what can you specifically do to help? And ending with what therapies are available and what can we expect them to do. So if we start by thinking about what stammering is and what stammering isn't. So there are different types of stammering here that you can see on the screen. So we'll take each of them in turn. So the first one here is repetition of whole words. So this will be short words, words that are one syllable, such as and, the, I, short words that are repeated, for example, and then I left. We also have repetitions of single sounds, where the first sound in a word can be repeated, for example, k, k, come, here. We then have prolongations or stretching of sounds, where a sound in a word could be in the start, could be the middle, is stretched, is prolonged. Sometimes I go out. We then have blocking, where the mouth is in position ready to say the word, but it gets stuck and no sound comes out. So that might look a bit like can. And then we also have less often, but we can also see some children, young people and adults who might have this final word repetitions or stretching, or final sound repetitions or stretching. And that might look a bit like cat, where the final sound in the word is repeated. Or a final word in a sentence could be repeated. For example, I want to go to the shop, shop, shop. Or a stretch might happen for a word which has a sound on the end that we can stretch, such as, for example, the word flow, flow, holding on to that last sound. So these are the types of stammering. And we know that stammering can also be accompanied by some additional features as well. And here's just some here. So facial tension. Sometimes you might notice that someone who stammers has tension in their face or somewhere in their body. You might notice certain bits of their face looking tense. For example, their lips or their neck might get tight. Or you might notice them looking away from with their eyes, so breaking the eye contact. There might be some struggle behaviour, so their body might move in an attempt potentially to push the word out, to help that word come out, which could involve them maybe hitting their leg, tapping their foot, some kind of movement of the body that they think helps that word come out. They might be doing some things to minimise or hide stammering, some strategies such as avoiding or changing words. So if they know that a particular word is quite difficult, in a sentence, they might change that word to something easier, or just avoid the situation altogether. So say less than they want to, or not go to the particular club or a particular class because they're worried about stammering there. And all of that can also be accompanied by a young person making comments about their speech. So some children might say, I can't get it out, or the word is stuck. So they might say something to show, showing their awareness that they know something is happening. Particularly for young children and some older children too, but particularly when young children's speech and language skills are developing, we might see some of these behaviours as well. These are not considered stammering behaviours, but can add to the overall picture of disfluency, can add to the overall picture that words are getting stuck, something is being repeated. So they might look like hesitations or pauses. For example, I like cats, so a pause there in the middle. There might be interjections, such as that use of filler, so I like cats. They might have revisions where they start a sentence and then restart it, but say something slightly different. We went to, I went to. Repetition of multisyllabic whole words. So this is where longer words are repeated. Because I like cats. So again, the single syllable repetitions, like that, can be a stammering behavior, but these longer words, these multisyllabic words, wouldn't be considered a stammering behavior. And then we also have phrase repetitions, so repeating a few words in a sentence. So I like cats. We know that stammering can be highly variable. So it can change from sound to sound, from word to word, in different situations, from different listeners, throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, and also from language to language. So when children or young people have more than one language, if they have multiple languages, we might notice, or parents might notice, that there's a difference between their languages. And we'll come in a bit to think about why this could be, thinking about causes and influences of stammering, but just to really kind of show how variable stammering can be. So things like not getting enough sleep, speaking at a pace which is difficult for their system to keep up with. So this is all very individual. So speaking at a pace for that child, if it's difficult for them to keep up with their own speed of speech. Using language which is above their level, or if they've got heightened emotions, such as feeling annoyed, frustrated, or excited. All of these things can increase the amount of stammering we can see once the child has already started stammering. And of course, then the opposite of that, so getting enough sleep, speaking at a pace which they can keep up with, which their system can keep up with, using language at their optimal level, and the ability to regulate their emotions can all help stammering feel a bit easier and help there to potentially be less stammering there, or that there's an ease in the flow of speech. And when we think about what stammering is, it's really important to think about kind of all of what stammering can be. So as we've already said, stammering can have the behaviours that you see at the top of this iceberg here. So the repetitions, some tension, you might see some blocking. And we touched very briefly on the fact that there can be other factors as well, other kind of physical body movements, other things that a child might do or say, which we could see, which would be on the top of this iceberg. And this iceberg is from Joseph Sheehan, is a way to think about all the aspects of stammering, not just the things that we can see or hear. So those things at the top of the iceberg, the struggle behaviour we might see, the tension, the types of stammering. But underneath that waterline, and an iceberg typically is bigger underneath the water than it is on top, we can have lots of things and features that we can't see, that we wouldn't know were there for a child or young person unless they told us. So this can be things like their emotions, so their feelings towards their stammering, which could be things like shame and embarrassment, or it could be thoughts that they have or avoidance behaviours that they might have to try and keep themselves safe. And in 2019, in this website linked here, Patrick Campbell, who is a person who stammers, added the water to his iceberg, to this iceberg, thinking through society. And that actually society plays a really big role when we think about the experience of someone when they're stammering. So what we've got here is around the iceberg in the water, things such as bullying, either experiencing it in that moment or a previous experience of bullying, a perfectionist society, time-limited things, exams, interviews, negative language around stammering that we might hear, the expectation of miracle cures, stammering being seen as just because somebody's nervous, or even that stammering is seen as a joke, that we have lots of automated systems these days, such as voice automated phone systems, where you're expected to say something quickly on the phone, or even things at home like Alexa, that kind of thing, and stereotyped media portrayals. And all of these things can happen in the environment that can affect somebody's experience of stammering. And that's where something like the social model of disability comes in, which is thinking more about the problems in society as a whole, rather than something like stammering being at the individual level. That actually, if we can do something in society and help stammering to be more accepting in society, that will have a really big impact on people who stammer. So it's not that we just look at the person who stammers and thinks, oh, what can we do to help you? We're thinking more widely because we know that society can have a really big impact on people who stammer in the positive way and also in the negative way as well. So essentially, when we think about the social model, it's very much that society as a whole needs to change, not the individual who stammers themselves. So why do people stammer? So we've touched briefly there on the influences of stammering, which we'll talk a little bit more about now, but why do people stammer? So we'll think through now about what research has told us and then also what can influence stammering as well. And there are some very subtle differences. When I talk now about causes and influences, you'll hear I'll use those two words a lot. So with causes, those are the things that mean somebody starts to stammer. Once the stammer is already there, there are factors that can influence it to happen more and less. But those are two very different things that I'll explain. And the way that I'm going to do that is through this Palin model, which we use as a clinical tool to help us think about different elements of that holistic system that I mentioned before, to understand an individual's experience, the environment experience, to know a little bit more about their stammering and what factors could be at play for that child or young person. So with the assessments that we do here, we're always thinking about making sure that we're assessing every level of this model. And this model, we would call it a multifactorial framework. So just showing that there are different factors at play here. And what we know is that there are genetic and neurological factors that underlie the cause of stammering. So those are the causes of stammering. While we know that language and communication, psychological, speech motor, and environmental factors can influence the onset, its development, the severity over time. So kind of the influence of how much or how little it happens, and the impact that it can have on that young person over time as well. Presenting this as a multifactorial model helps us to really understand the complexity and the variability of stammering, that it's not just one factor at play, it's all of these things together. It helps us to identify significant factors to therapy content. So what do we want to include in our therapy, as well as what our priorities are, where should we start? And it also helps to illustrate that stammering is influenced by a range of internal and external factors. So some internal intrinsic factors are things like the child's temperament, their emotional reactivity, their language levels, while we've got the extrinsic, the external factors being the environment that they're in, whether that's home or school or anywhere else. So firstly, we've got our physiological factors here. So looking at our model, that's the physical body in the middle. So here we know that genetics can play a role in the onset of stammering, so the cause why someone starts to stammer. So about 2/3 of the families that we see here at the centre, there'll be another family member in the family who also stammers. And about 1/3 of the families that we see here won't have a family member who stammers. So we know that there's a genetic link there for those children who do have that as a factor in their stammering. We also know that sex can play a part as well, that the same number of boys and girls will start stammering when they're young, but we know that more boys continue stammering than girls. So there's a vulnerability there. And we also know from more recent research around brain structure and function that people who stammer, when scientists have looked at brain scans of people who stammer, and I imagine like laid these brain scans on top, when they can see patterns in the brain behavior, what they can see is that the messages that get sent around the brain are less efficient in people who stammer compared to people who don't. And that's not on an individual brain level. So this is group studies thinking about this brain structure and function. So it's group studies, group data, and it's not that these differences are detectable in individuals. So what I often say to my families is that if someone did a brain scan of their child or of them, they wouldn't be able to say, yes, this is a person who stammers. It's not that. It's not kind of individual. It's when they're looking at group data. In terms of cause of stammering, then we just know that parents don't cause stammering. So that's often something that can come up in our assessments, in our therapy when we do that here, is that parents can worry that they've done something or haven't done something, which means that their child is stammering. And we know that that is definitely not the case. We also know that the brain is more plastic than we've previously thought up into adulthood. So perhaps that's a support for early intervention, that actually that might impact brain development, which can help support our younger children who start to stammer. So in terms of that kind of brain plasticity, we know that the brain is able to remap things, especially when younger, but also throughout life as well. So that was the physiological factor. Now to move on our kind of journey around this Palin model, thinking about the things that can influence stammering once it's already there. So once someone's already started stammering, what are the factors that can make it happen more or happen less? So in terms of speech motor, so we know that speech rate, so the pace that someone speaks at, can have a big impact. So if someone speaks too quickly for their own system, again, very individual, but if they speak very quickly for their system or at a very variable speech rate, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, that might mean we can see more stammering. Equally, if somebody is able to speak slower and can monitor that, they might find speech easier. And we also know that the stability of the speech motor patterns. So as a child is learning to speak, they're learning all these motor patterns. As that becomes more stable, speech can get easier. So then we've got language and communication at the top of our model there. So in terms of language development, so again, like I mentioned before, with the influences of stammering, we might see more stammering if a child has had a big language leap. So they've suddenly had a big developmental spurt in terms of their language skills. We might expect to see more stammering at that point as their system, as their speech system is trying to keep up with all this extra language that they've got that they're attempting to use. We also know that bilingualism does not cause stammering and is an asset. So this is, again, a frequently asked question, something that we get asked a lot in our assessments. Does bilingualism cause stammering? So therefore, should parents just use one language at home? No, we know that bilingualism does not cause stammering, and that things like code switching between languages is completely kind of a natural phenomenon and is acceptable, and wouldn't mean that we need to do anything different if the child starts to stammer. From a speech therapist point of view, it's important to think about when we meet bilingual families to just think about if there's any differences in stammering between the different languages that the child speaks. And then we've also got our speech sounds, our phonology there. And it might be that some children who have a stammer also have some speech sound difficulties, again, as their speech motor system is catching up, is kind of getting there with its sounds. So we have to sometimes make a clinical decision there about which one to work on first. So if we've got a child who is stammering and does have speech sound needs, where they might need some intervention for their speech sounds, it can be that kind of clinical decision making of which one do we treat first. And in fact, there is research that suggests kind of any option. So working on stammering first and then working on speech sounds has been found to be effective. The opposite also, so working on speech sounds first and then working on stammering, also been found to be effective, and equally working on them both at the same time. It just depends on the child, on the family, and those individual differences when you're making that clinical decision. And then that brings us to the psychological factors, so those thoughts and feelings. And it's really important to have an idea of a child's temperament and their levels of awareness and their reactions to their own stammering, which can help us understand a bit more about what's happening for this child and this family and therapy and what we should do next. So what we know from the research is that children who stammer, their temperament tends to be that they are more emotionally reactive. So that's they react quicker to an external stimuli, but it also can take them longer to calm down afterwards too. And the reason that that's important is that if a child who stammers is particularly sensitive, are they going to be more aware of their speech when they're stammering? Are they going to have more reactions to their speech when they're stammering? Is it going to bother them more, essentially, because they have that vulnerability to be more emotionally reactive? And of course, with younger children, being emotionally reactive is just what children do. They're still learning those self-regulation skills. But of course, this can be something that follows us, up into being adolescents and also as adults too, that we can be reactive, we can react to things. And all of this sits in the environment. So that's why we've got that bubble around the outside there being the environment, which, as I've mentioned, is home, school, and any other environments that the child or young person finds themselves in. So again, we know parents don't cause stammering, but we know that stammering can impact on parents. So we know that they can become heightened to the moments of stammering, become very aware. They can have emotional responses to the stammering. They can respond to the stammering in a way that can be helpful, waiting, giving time. And we know that all of this stuff is taking place in a communication environment, which sometimes can be supportive of a child who stammers and sometimes not, just depending on that environment. So what this means for parents, the clinical implications. So we love having parents involved for all of the therapy that the child receives. So when it's a two-parent household, we always get both parents involved in the assessment process and also involved in the therapy process too. We know that they will have different ways of supporting their own child, and also because they'll have needs of their own, they might be coming at the stammering from different perspectives. So we're really getting the whole picture if we've got both parents in that room. We know that it's really important to discuss with parents very openly about their own feelings, their concerns, potentially their worries. And we know that the parents might need support with wider things beyond the stammering, beyond speech, that they might need some support with, that we can offer some help for. And we need to reinforce that the child's underlying vulnerabilities make talking more difficult for them in the context of these typical adult-child interactions. So parents haven't caused stammering, they haven't done anything that means their child is stammering, but in typical parent-child interactions, we know that the child who stammers may need something a bit different. It might be more difficult for them in that typical interaction because of their stammering. And you might see in this webinar that we mention him. That's because often information when we write about stammering, we use him because, as I've said, more boys continue stammering than girls. So that's why you see that pronoun being used. So will the child continue to stammer into adulthood? So this is a question we get asked a lot, and as other professionals, as teachers, people get asked too. So when a young child starts to stammer, how will we know if it's likely to continue? And therefore, how can other people around that child decide what to do? So which children need intervention then? So what do we know from the research then? So we know that 1 in 5 children who start to stammer will continue into adulthood. So between the ages of 2 and 5, about 8% of children will start stammering. And we know that between 1 and 3% of adults stammer. So we know that the vast majority of children who start stammering will stop. But I'll come to this, but we don't know which ones will keep stammering and who will stop. We know that more boys continue to stammer than girls, and that there's that genetic link there that stammering runs in families. We know that stammering can have an impact on the child's emotional well-being, and that children who are more likely to continue stammering can respond well to therapy. So we can't predict whether an individual child will continue to stammer or not, but we know that stammering can have an impact even from the preschool years. So very close to onset, children who stammer can have an impact on them. And we know that stammering can also have an impact on parents too. So as a general rule of thumb, we think if a child is stammering, so if we can confirm that it definitely is stammering, and the child is worried or the parents are worried about it, we would say to do an assessment. So this might be relevant for you if you are a teacher or another professional who might be someone who could refer a child to your local speech therapy service for stammering. If the parents are worried about it, even if the child's not aware, or if the child is aware and is worried about it, make a referral. How can people help? So we'll start by thinking more generally about people in the public, how can they help? And then think more specifically about parents, about teaching staff, and then about other health professionals. So generally, what we would say is that for people to wait and listen is the most helpful thing to do. It can be really natural to give advice to try and help. Things that we often hear from families, from young people, will be things like, oh, take a breath, stop and start again, or just slow down. And while this is all well-meaning and might feel helpful, maybe if the child does do those things, parents notice a difference. But what we find is actually just waiting and listening is the best thing to do. Giving advice makes it seem like the child who stammers needs that help, that they need to do something different with their speech for it to be acceptable. So rather waiting and listening, giving them the space and the time that they need, and really trying to take that step back and not give that advice. Be aware of turn taking, so in a group or even in one-to-one, be aware of taking those turns and not interrupting. And as well, being aware of facial expressions and body language, trying to do whatever you can with your body and with your face to put that person at ease. and be an advocate for people who stammer out there wider in the environment. As we said, with the social model and the iceberg, thinking about the water, the more we can advocate and the more accepting we can be of people who stammer, the better. So that's some general advice. So specifically parents, what can parents do to help? So one thing we would recommend is to have something called special times together, which is one-to-one time between a parent and a child, where they just enjoy talking, playing a game together, having a chat about their day. If the child is older, going out for a milkshake together, having a hot chocolate, whatever it might be, spending some time together. Just enjoying that time. It could be 5 minutes, about 3 times a week, so a few times a week for 5 minutes each, just having that one-to-one time, that special time. And if there's more than one parent involved, having one parent with the child and the other parent with the child can help as well, so that that child just knows they've got your undivided attention during that 5 minutes. We know that it's okay to be open about stammering. So particularly if your child is aware, maybe they've shown that they're frustrated, maybe they've said something about their speech, they've made a noise when they stammer, it's okay to be open about it. What we know is that if we stay silent and we don't say anything about it, it can really create this conspiracy of silence. It can make stammering feel like a taboo, that they're doing something wrong, that they shouldn't be doing. So the more we can bring it out into the open and be open about it, it can feel like it's less of a taboo and it's not this conspiracy of silence that, oh, you know, I've noticed that I'm doing something with my speech, but nobody's mentioned it. I must therefore be doing something wrong. So being open about it, acknowledging that you've noticed a moment of stammering, but that the child continued saying what they want to say. And yes, you know, I really want to hear what you have to say. So that's great. You kept going. Just to acknowledge in a very neutral way, in a positive way, that we're aware something is happening in the child's speech. And for older children, as they age and maybe their awareness increases, they might come to you as a teacher, as a parent, and tell you about their speech. They might ask you questions about it. And it's okay to be open and to be open with them about it. For parents as well, to build the child's confidence. So within speech of, you know, praising the child if they come and tell you about a presentation they've done in school, but also wider than that. So also acknowledging and praising the child for all the things that they're doing, times that they're kind or helpful or independent or creative. Really noticing that good stuff and praising them for it really helps to build their confidence and resilience. Notice what seems to help. So for your child or for the child that you're seeing who stammers, thinking about what is it that helps them. So for parents, if you know that your child seems to, you know, if they're well rested, that seems to mean speech is a bit easier for them. Maybe they're less frustrated by it. Notice that and try and build on that. Help them by giving more time, by setting an unhurried pace when possible. So as parents, really modeling giving yourself time in situations, giving your child time, really modeling that. So it's not about the child being told to slow down or do something different for themselves, but actually as adults, as parents, what can we model that the child is more likely to mirror and copy without them even knowing they're doing it? And thinking about turn taking. So if there are siblings especially involved, thinking about that family turn taking of making sure that every voice is heard and that everyone is getting a turn in a conversation. A couple of book recommendations here. So the How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk book is really great. It's got a chapter in there about building confidence. There's also lots of other things in there around managing emotions as well. It's a book that we recommend for all of our families to read. It's a really good one that we really come back to a lot. And then also we've got Dr. Becky Kennedy's book, Good Inside, which is really helpful, a practical guide for parents, and particularly chapters in there around managing emotions as well can be really helpful. Those are often ones I signpost my families to. And on our website, you can see there the link on our website under resources, and for parents, you'll find a wealth of other resources and recommendations as well. So that's for parents. Thinking about what teachers can do and how teachers can help. So on our YouTube channel, we've got two versions of a video called Wait, Wait, I'm Not Finished Yet. There's a short version, which I think is about 12 minutes, and a longer version, which is about 20 minutes. And it's children of all ages, from kind of younger to teenage, adolescent ages, talking about their experience of stammering in schools and specifically what teachers can do to support them. So I would really recommend that you check those videos out, or check one of them out. And it's something we would recommend for all teaching staff. I just wanted to show this. It's because it's really important to be aware that lots of speaking activities that are completed in school can affect young people who stammer. And this is an example of a cognitive behavioural therapy cycle from a young person TB, thinking about if they're asked a question in class, what their response would be. So initially we've got what their thoughts are. So the thoughts they notice when they're asked a question in classes: I'll stutter, people will laugh, they will think that I'm odd. Those thoughts then move on to these emotions. So this means TB will be feeling nervous, will be feeling embarrassed. And those ratings are the intensity of that emotion. So if 100% is the most nervous you could be, how nervous would you be in this situation being asked a question in class? We then move from the emotion to the automatic body response. The heart starts to race, the body goes tense, you start to feel hot. And then that leads to the behaviour of what you do. So for this young person, they said if they're asked a question in class, they might say, I don't know. Even if they do know the answer, they might freeze and not say anything. They might look down at their desk or let someone else speak for them. So really, when we're thinking about what teachers and what teaching staff can do in schools, it's, for speaking, it's all taking place within this. And I guess just a really key thing to say is it's not a definite thing that all the young people in your class will experience this particular cycle if they're asked a question in class. But they might be experiencing something similar for different speaking situations, such as being asked to read aloud in class, or maybe delivering a presentation in front of the class, or doing an assembly or a production in drama or something. So this cycle, we start with the thoughts, the feelings, the body response, and the behaviour. But it's not a circular cycle. It can kind of crisscross over as well. So then what can teaching staff do? So lots of information on the next couple of slides, but this is just information taken from our website that you can find at that link at the top. So again, under resources for teachers. So what we know is that, the most helpful thing is to give that pupil who stammers plenty of time for whatever speaking situation they're in, to answer the question, to speak to you, to read aloud. And encourage thinking time for the whole class and model it yourself in the classroom. So encouraging everyone to really have thinking time, to think before they speak. To model a really relaxed, slow style of speaking to help establish a calm classroom environment. And ensure that pupils between themselves take turns with one another and don't get rewarded if they shout out, if they call out. So therefore make sure pupils are putting their hand up if they want to answer a question. And also that they put their hands down when someone is speaking, that they're listening to others and that they're not making interruptions or making comments while other people are speaking in the class. So just really creating that environment that this is actually what we do for everybody. For everybody, when someone's speaking, the hands go down to really take that pressure off. The people who stammers may find it easier to indicate when they're ready to speak. So rather than going around the class, for instance, around the tables of people taking turns to read aloud, for example, reading a paragraph each, the pupil might find it easier that they put their hand up if they want to. Or they might prefer that you pick them. So it might be about asking that young person what they would prefer, what they would want, because of course we're all different. Everyone who stammers is different. They might want different things. It might be, for example, during certain structured speaking tasks like the register, thinking about how to do that. Again, this is very individual. So moving down the rows or moving in alphabetical order might add pressure. For example, the people who stammers might be waiting for their turn to be called and they have to answer. Or if they're asked to speak at the end of a lesson when classmates are eager to leave, that might be a bit more pressured for them. So instead, kind of giving them early turns or adopting a more random style of turn-taking selection. So rather than going round the tables or down an alphabetical order for the register, maybe doing it in a more random way, or helping or letting the person who stammers come earlier in the list. Encourage everyone to contribute in class. So that the person who stammers feels that they are also able to contribute. So having a hierarchy, that maybe there are some smaller passages they could read or longer ones if they wanted to. So that they can start with smaller contributions with a group, with an audience of familiar people, of friends. And potentially for reading aloud, allowing people to answer or read in unison. So reading alongside somebody else in the class, and helping them to slowly increase the length of their contributions or the size of the audience. Be aware that pupils who stammer sometimes hide their stammering by not contributing, pretending that they don't know the answer to something when they do, asking to be excused, going to the toilet, or trying to be the joker of the class because they're trying to avoid or hide their stammering. They might also, as said before, change certain words. So not use a certain word, change it to something else, which can obviously be a bit more troublesome in certain classes, maybe science, where there's certain terminology that needs to be used. So just being aware that this might be something that your pupils are doing to really manage that moment of stammering. We know that pupils who stammer will have the same aspirations as their peers. So if they obviously want to take part in an activity, having a role in a play, giving a presentation, that is absolutely fine. We want to promote that and support them in doing that. And don't let others in the class prevent them from it or try to get them to stop doing it. And as a stammer can be variable, some days might be different. So some days the pupil may prefer not to speak, whereas other days they may want to. And again, something negotiating with that young people to find out if there's certain ways that they might show they want to speak that day. And if they don't, that's fine too. And this is how they can show you. So that's something to negotiate rather than to be encouraged long term. So really understanding that variability is important, that things might change and things might be different. So reasonable adjustments here. So this is when a young person or an adult who stammers might need some adjustments made to an activity. Adjustments that are reasonable, as it says in the title there, to give them a level playing field. So lots of information can be found at the Stammer website, STAMMA. On reasonable adjustments, this is part of a resource that they've got, just a screenshot of one of the pages here to show us an example. So this can be relevant for the whole age range of people who stammer, but perhaps might be particularly relevant for exams. So for young people doing their GCSEs and doing some kind of speaking exams. And as you can see here, there's certain challenges that people who stammer face. There's some suggestions there about reasonable adjustments and the proposed outcome. So examples of reasonable adjustments can be in an interview or during a presentation, being given unlimited time. So not even that they're given an extra 10 or 20% as additional time, but actually unlimited time can really take that time pressure off. Perhaps they get to receive questions early, for example, for an exam or an interview, and maybe they can write some responses down that they can then read out in the interview. Just to really help that person feel really as comfortable as they can, as comfortable as possible in that particular environment. And what can so that's what teaching staff can do. What can other healthcare professionals do? So as I've said, if you notice a child is stammering or if parents discuss that with you, and if parents are worried about it or the child is worried about it, make a referral to your local speech and language therapy service. You can also take a look at our website, which has additional resources for health professionals on there, and also our helpline. And I'll come to the number at the end. Our helpline is there. You can speak to a specialist therapist who can give some advice and some support if you've got a specific child in mind. So what therapies are available then, really across the ages? So what have we got available and what can we expect them to do? So what are the outcomes that we're looking for? And therapy can be a whole range of things. So once a child is known to speech therapy, this would depend on what is available in your local area, but generally there's things like individual therapy, group therapy, therapy that can be face-to-face or online. And there will also be support groups or organisations perhaps in your local area that you can signpost families to as well. So the aims of therapy are for that child to be a really confident and competent communicator so that they're able to fully participate in their lives, reach their potential with or without stammering. We want parents to develop the knowledge, skills, and confidence to support their child. And we want parents and the child to develop the longer term skills that will help them to navigate life with stammering. So it's really about upskilling people, giving people the knowledge and the confidence to know what to do. And we know that there is no cure for stammering, and therapy will not focus on eliminating stammering. In fact, some successful therapy might include more stammering because as the child or young person avoids less, or as they start saying more because they feel more able to through therapy, the child might actually start stammering more, and that can still be a successful therapy outcome. So now therapy is not about eliminating stammering. It's more about the knowledge and confidence, being a confident, competent communicator. So across the ages for preschool children, there are a few different therapies that you might see online if you were to look. So typically here thinking about the under sevens. So there's something called Palin parent-child interaction therapy, which I'll talk through on the next slide. The LIDCOM program, which you might see about on the internet. The Restart Demands and Capacities therapy, and mini kids. And here in the UK, typically Palin PCI, so Palin parent-child interaction therapy, and LIDCOM therapy tend to be the therapies of choice. Obviously, as you can see in the title, Palin parent-child interaction therapy is something that was developed here at the centre. So this is typically the therapy for this age group that we really would recommend. And how that looks is that it's an indirect therapy approach. So we're working through parents to support the child. It starts with 6 weekly sessions with the child and both parents, if a two-parent household, if both parents are involved. We start with these 6 weekly sessions, then we have a review 6 weeks later. And in those 6 weekly sessions, we're working with the family to think about their interaction strategies. So we'll set up special times, that 5-minute time to interact, and we'll think through what makes it easier and more joyful for the child to communicate. What can the parent do within that 5 minutes to help it feel like a really free, enjoyable communication? And then we'll think of family strategies, which can be things around family turn taking. It can be openness about stammering, building confidence and resilience skills. So those two branches of therapy really go hand in hand together. If needed, we might work more directly with the child in an additional block of therapy, which could be a whole host of things that I'll come to on the next slide. And Palin PCI is something that we train therapists worldwide in. It's a 2-day training course that we host here at the centre. So if you're a therapist and you're interested in being trained, have a check of our website and you'll see if we've got dates for our next PCI training course. So when children are a little bit older, for example, when they're from about the age of 7, 8 and above, we'd be looking at something called family communication skills, thinking about our program that we do here, which focuses on communication skills, learning more about stammering, being open about stammering, managing thoughts and feelings, and really with this plan to desensitize, so to feel more okay about stammering. And, you know, this talks about school-age children, but actually when I mentioned the more direct work on the last slide here, the child strategies, for children who are a bit younger, we can still cover all of this stuff. It's just in a more child or younger child-friendly way. Within the older age groups too, we can cover other psychological counselling approaches as well. So we've already touched on that cognitive behavioural therapy with that cycle from school. Solution-focused brief therapy is also something we use a lot at the centre, and acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness. So really, we have a very holistic view here at the centre, bringing lots of different aspects of therapy in to support that child and that family. And for our older teens, our young people and our adults, it's pretty much the same as the above, but without parents. And it's very much led by the young person. So at this point, the young person might have an idea of what they want to be working towards, what they're finding a bit more difficult, why they're coming to therapy, where they can set their own goals and be a bit more in charge of the management and kind of what they do in their therapy sessions. They might prefer group therapy to meet other people of a similar age who stand as two, to have that shared experience, or they might prefer individual therapy. And we might choose specific things dependent on what is, important at this age group. This age group might be thinking about interview skills for university or jobs. So we might do some specific sessions around a certain goal that the young person or adult has. So that's a look at the different therapies that are available. In terms of next steps for you watching this webinar, so if you're a speech and language therapist, based on this information, you can access training courses, as I've already said, by looking at our website, and you can sign up to our newsletter to receive information about our training courses and get some discounts. If you're a parent, we have our helpline where you can reach out and speak to a therapist who can give you some support. Teachers, we have our helpline as well. And we also have some courses that are specific for teaching staff. So the Building Confidence and Resilience course is one that any professionals can access, so particularly one that's good for teaching staff. And for other health professionals, again, our helpline is there. I'll give the number on the next slide. And also other courses that we run, such as Solution-Focused Brief Therapy, is a course that's not just open for speech therapists, but for wider professionals as well. That's our helpline number at the top there that you can ring. And if you ring the number, you can leave a voicemail or leave a message with one of our administrative team, and a therapist will get back to you and will give you a call back or drop you an email back. Stammer, the organisation Stammer, also have a helpline, as do Action for Stammering Children, and that's the details for their helplines as well. So just to acknowledge, big thank you to Whittington Health, the NHS Trust here, and also the Whittington Health Charity. And a thank you to all of the therapists here at the Michael Palin Centre, and of course the children and families that we work with as well. A couple of references there. So talked about Palin parent-child interaction therapy. That's the reference for the manual that therapists may like to purchase if they're delivering the therapy. And that's the reference to the blog post with the iceberg that I showed at the start. And thank you for listening. That's everything. If you've got any questions, please do reach out to us. Like I've said, our helpline is there, and I hope that you found this webinar helpful, whether you're a parent, a teacher, teaching staff, or other health professionals. So thank you.